When I first started planning my trip to Outer Bike, I envisioned 3 solid days of riding lifts up the mountain for gravity-fueled descents. No pedaling, just straight downhill. So I wanted to ride bikes that would leave the gnar totally shredded, bro. Luckily for me, I tagged along with some friends who were a little wiser than me and didn't look at bikes in just this one dimension. They wanted to see how well-rounded the bikes were, pedaling, climbing, as well as going downhill. So my buddies looked at overall performance. I was researching bikes that were more gravity focused. I was looking at enduro bikes mostly. I looked at the Yeti SB100 a bit, but none of the Yeti bikes were really on my I have to ride list. In fact, I sort of had a thing against Yeti bikes. I mean, they're really expensive, pretty much just for dentists, right? In my mind, they're kind of like the, oh, look at me, I'm so cool, I ride a Yeti bike. But by day 2, I was already feeling a little bit tired. The previous day left me a little more worn out than I thought. So our plan had been to ride a little bit of cross-country loop in the morning and then do lifts in the afternoon. So I wanted to leave as much energy as possible for the fun stuff in the afternoon. I'd heard about the Yeti SB100. I knew that it was a light bike and it should be a rocket ship going up the hills. I thought this would be a good bike for a little bit of climbing we had planned. So I headed over to the Yeti booth for their XC bike. I settled on the extra large SB100. Just over 6 feet tall, the geochart says that I should be on the large, but I hadn't even looked at the geochart before I rode it, so I didn't know. Regardless, I like longer bikes, and definitely am glad I did not size down to the large, as the extra large fit me really well. The guy at the Yeti booth did an awesome job setting up the bike. He set me up with a little more sag in the shock than is typical, and that worked out really well for me. The other guys at the booth were making fun of him for being old and slow, but man, he knew how to set up a bike. One of the great things about Outer Bike in Sun Valley is that you don't have to just ride the lifts or even ride all the way to a pedaling loop. They had shuttles that will drive you to a nearby trail system. The shuttle drivers were all knowledgeable and good to talk to, so we hopped on a shuttle which took us just south of where the Sun Valley Ski Resort is. I rode this bike on the Greenhorn Imperial Loop in Ketchum. It's a 10-mile loop with about 2,000 feet of climbing, so not a huge ride, but good enough for a shakedown of this bike. The trail system was a lot of fun, but the views were just amazing, and the footage doesn't do it justice, as it never really can. And even though these were all old motorcycle trails, it seemed like they were made for this bike. We hadn't even gotten very far out of the parking lot when I knew I'd picked the right bike. The Yeti SB100 climbed amazingly well. Sometimes it felt like I got more out of it than I put into it. Well, okay, that's taken a little far, but it definitely felt like an efficient climber. When I pushed, the bike went forward. It was also a very comfortable bike that fit me well. I could see this being a great all-day epic bike where you're putting in just a ton of miles. But, I mean, you kind of expect that, right? This is a short travel bike from Yeti, who are pretty much already known to make efficient bikes. Like the new SB165, people are saying, well, that bike pedals pretty well. Well, just imagine an even shorter travel bike that's more geared towards pedaling. Unfortunately, I'm still slower than my friends, even on the super fast bike, so they still beat me up the hills. But I can't imagine that I was putting out more watts than them, as this bike just felt super efficient. But as they say, what goes up must come down. So I had some descending to do, and I really thought that this is where this bike was just going to fall apart. Instead, I had a total aha moment where I was really surprised at how confident and stable this bike was. I really wasn't expecting it to be all that good on the downhill, but it felt great. I'm not saying I'd mistake it for a 170 travel bike. During the little bit of rocky sections we had, I definitely had to be paying attention, but that doesn't mean it wasn't capable. I just think it's a little bit different style of riding. It's not a plow, you just have to pick your lines a little more, be a little more conscientious, be more on your game. So it didn't feel cushy or plush, and you're not going to smash through a rock garden at full speed, but it did inspire a lot more confidence than I thought that it would. So, not being a plow, it was very direct. It was flickable, it was lively. So, kind of at odds with the whole stability thing, right? But it struck a pretty good balance, much better balance than I thought it would. In a way, it almost reminded me of riding a rigid bike, in that you just feel everything that the trail is doing underneath you. But unlike riding a rigid bike, it never got harsh. You would feel it, but it wouldn't jar you. So part of that is probably due to the awesome suspension spec. But I really feel like you could ride this bike hard, send it off with just about anything, but if I had to describe it in one word, it would be nimble. I mean, this bike is just begging to change directions. It's like a laser pointer on the ground that would just go anywhere that you pointed it. You think about it, and it's already there. I think maybe a lot of this is due to the low weight of the bike, because it was a very light bike, but it's also just as much probably down to the geo. Much less important than the geo, though, is the part spec. And I think that it was a very obviously expensive bike, so it had some pretty top-notch parts on it, but I think they were mostly good choices. So it only has 2.3-inch wide tires, kind of following that cross-country theme, and I really didn't think they were going to provide very much traction. And maybe that's just the magic of the DHF front tire on this bike, is that it dug in much better than I expected. The aggressor tire in the rear was also a great tire. I've been riding on 3-inch tires for the past little while, and I thought that, that was going to be the ultimate in grip. But these skinny tires with the big knobs, they really feel like they dig in a little better than maybe some fatter tires. And on the type of trail we were riding, I think it was a perfect combination. Along with the part spec, this bike was one of the top-notch builds, so it had a Fox factory 34 fork and a factory DPS shock. They were both great. They felt awesome. It was doing everything I wanted to do. The bike was the X01 build, so it had an X01 shifter, which does have a little bit nicer feeling and nicer sounding click-clack than the GX shifter. For me, it probably wasn't worth it. So the X01 is a nice to have. It felt nice, but I don't know if I'd pay for it. The one thing that I didn't really like so much with the part spec, the fly in the ointment, is the SRAM level TLM brakes. They were definitely usable and they had enough power. I never felt like I was lacking in power, but just like all SRAM brakes, they have a lot of modulation, so you have to pull the lever a lot, and I'm just not used to that. I'm much more accustomed to Shimano, where you get that initial bite and power. But none of these things are a deal breaker as much as the price is. I was riding the $8,000 X01 race build, which is just a crazy amount of money to me for a bike. You could get the GX build, which is probably the way I would go. It's 2 pounds heavier, and so not quite as light, but still going to be a really light bike, and it'll probably be 99% as good as this build, but it's $3,000 less. So you don't get the super nice fancy factory suspension, and like I said, you gain a couple pounds, but for me that $3,000 would be worth it. And at that point, maybe a $5,000 bike with a full carbon frame, I guess maybe that's not dentist money. I'm not saying it's great value, but still pretty expensive. So to do a little nutshelling, climbing, I give this bike 5 stars. Descending, I give it 2 thumbs up. The value, I'd give it a C or a C minus. Now keep in mind also, I only rode this bike on one trail for one time. It was insightful for me though, because I was riding a lot of different bikes back to back. More than anything, I would just say outer bike is great for that reason. You can hop on one bike and then another and really feel out the differences. Another thing is, I'm just a very average rider. I'm not fast, as you can tell from the footage. You can look at my Strava ride, I'll have that in the description below, see my pace. So definitely take everything I say with a grain of salt. Get on your own test ride, go to outer bike, go to a demo event to try this bike out. I would recommend it. At the end of the day though, the question is, would I buy this bike? And for me, I probably wouldn't, just because it's not filling the niche that I'm looking for in a bike. If I had a larger quiver, if I had a 3rd or a 4th mountain bike, absolutely, this would be a sweet bike. For me though, I'm shopping for something that's going to be a little more aggressive. I have, like I said, my rigid bike, and that's my direct when I want to feel the trail bike. So I want something a little more aggressive. Not quite as aggressive as the Nuke Proof Mega that I had ridden the day before. That was definitely more of a race bike and enduro bike. So I'm kind of looking for that middle Goldilocks bike. And luckily for me, I found that the next ride that I went on, I found a bike that I was super stoked on. which I'll do a video on shortly. But maybe this for you is your Goldilocks bike. Definitely a fun bike. Again, definitely recommend checking one out.